My name is Christy Falteruso. I am the Chief Customer Officer here at ClientSuccess, and this is part of our Customer Success Leadership Bootcamp series. So if you have attended these in the past, welcome back. If this is your first time joining, welcome. This is a series that we put together oh my God, it's 2025. So about 4 years ago, we started this series, and we usually run it every quarter where we pick 1 month in the quarter, and we pick 4 different topics to run every Tuesday in that month. We have recorded over 65 hours of bootcamp content. All of it can be found on our YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and go through any of our other bootcamp sessions, they're all there for you to review. Wonderful, wonderful content. This is another installation in that series. So like I said earlier, this is our March series. The theme for this is onboarding. We know how important onboarding is to our customers, to our success, long and short term. So I wanted to make sure that we were kicking off the year kind of like the way we kick off customer journey, right at the beginning. So this entire 4-part series will tackle 4 different topics in the onboarding experience realm. And so we're going to start today with our first session, which is called No Points of Friction. And this is going to cover a little bit about how to manage a seamless onboarding experience, especially when there's multiple contacts involved. I know a lot of us have different handoffs, whether it's sales to CS, from CS to onboarding. That is my dog. I apologize. I hope she quiets down. And so we're going to go through all of that, how to create the optimal experience to drive the optimal outcome. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in. So I love to start with any statistic, things that just help us rally around what it is that we're here to talk about and why it is so important. So pull together some stats. I always find these really compelling and very interesting, but we found that ineffective onboarding causes 23% of all customer churn in SaaS. That is a statistic that has been provided by Retently.com. So you can go check out their survey that they did on this. They had a great report, but that to me was an astounding number, right? Because we know that there's tons of different reasons causing customers to stay and to go. But when you see a number this large tied to one part of our customer journey, it makes us realize that we really need to double click into this and spend a lot of time ensuring that we get it right. I also found that 74% of customers feel frustration when the onboarding process lacks adequate guidance. Now, this was interesting to me because I know so many of us are also thinking about designing and creating digital journeys and how do we onboard customers at scale. And so this session today will not be tackling that. We're going to talk more about a more kind of guided experience where you have a little bit more of that one-to-one or team approach to onboarding and implementation. But this was really interesting because if you think about it, not all technology is super easy to use, super intuitive, especially as you move up market and you've got really complex, highly customizable enterprise-grade software. It does require a little bit more support, a little bit more guidance, a bit more instruction. And your customers, if they're not getting what they need to be successful during that stage, that frustration grows. Right. And we know that this is kind of the beginning of that death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? If you get this wrong, if your customers are highly frustrated or they have failure to launch, right? They don't really get onboarded the right way within the right amount of time, it's going to cause long-term problems. And so we want to make sure that we're avoiding the cause of frustration wherever and however we can. And that's what we're going to be tackling a bit today because we understand the complexities and the nuances that are a part of this experience for our customers. So I'm big on managing the experience to the extent that we can. Now, I'm a planner. I like to think that I think of everything and that I account for everything. But the reality is we know that things are going to come up. Our customers are not all the same. You cannot design a one-size-fits-all experience for everybody and assume that it is going to get it right 100% of the time. But we do know that if you manage the experience effectively, you can have a higher likelihood of control around that outcome. And that's what we want to talk about. So here's what we know, right? If it's a convoluted process and complex people matrices, is that a word? Matrices. We're going to say it is. It's going to create more work for our customers. It's a real burden for them. Now think about a time where maybe you were focusing on an onboarding of a solution, right? So maybe it's something in your tech stack and you're going through this process and you've got a very disjointed experience, right? There's all these different things that you're supposed to do. It's not clear what to do when or how to do it. And then in addition to that, you're introducing tons of different people and stakeholders, and you've got an onboarding manager and a training enablement person. You've got a CSM, right? All of that can create frustration for your customer can create a very disjointed experience. And so that's something we need to consider. You've got multiple people in the relationship, which creates confusion and chaos. A lot of times we don't do a great job of articulating roles and responsibilities, and you've got 5 people showing up to a call, and you're like, yeah, we're all here as part of your account team. And then, you send in an email, and it's like, oh, nope, that doesn't go to me. That goes to Mary. Oh, nope, sorry, that goes to Bob. That is really difficult for customers to manage through, right? They don't want to have 1,000 different points of contact, especially when it's not clear who they should go to, when, why, and how. Then you've got customers who struggle with multiple transitions. Now, we know this because I know that people are still talking about how horrible and how difficult it is to have a sales to CS handoff and how that transition really dilutes information and causes points of friction. So we know that customers also struggle with transitions, right? You've got a new person. They may not have all the context that you've shared. It's not optimal. And then lastly, we know that our customers, you have ultimately one person who ends up being their go-to. We've seen this time and time again, right? If there's a very long sales process, and we know that this is true for, again, you think upmarket, large enterprise software, maybe the sales process takes up to a year, right? Now they've built a relationship with that salesperson. How hard is it to let go of that one individual? So it's not unlikely that your customers at some point are going to grow an affinity to one person, right? Like that becomes their person that they go to help them figure out where to go or how to get something done. And that can be challenging, right? If you've got your customers who keep going back to their onboarding manager or go back to their salesperson, right? You're losing continuity, you're losing context, you're losing relationship equity. So there's a lot to be considered there. So these are things that we know to be true because these exist day in and day out for our customers in all different types of levels of severity, right? Not this extreme end for any one experience or any one company, but these are all things that we need to think through. So we're going to tackle a bit of this today and make sure that we've got plans to kind of talk through what do we do and how do we do it. So I know that not everyone's organization is going to feel this complex, but for some of you, this could be the reality. And so you've got this experience where you've got a prospect who's working with the sales team, right? They're working doing all this work up front. They're sharing a ton of information, a lot of context. And then all of a sudden it goes from sales to CS. And now you've got CS who does a kickoff meeting and they've introduced and brought on board their project manager. And so now you're doing this partnership kickoff meeting and you've got the sales person who's maybe there, hopefully they're there. You've got a CS person who's now your primary point of contact, but now you've got a PM. Then your PM says, oh, that's great. I'm going to help you manage your onboarding implementation, but I'm bringing this implementation person on board because they're there as your technical resource. And then they bring somebody in who's like, okay, great. We're going to help you get integrated, but we don't do training enablement. We actually have somebody else who's going to help with end user training enablement. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're going back to CS. Like, this is a real reality for folks. In fact, I actually just personally went through an experience with a product. I will not name names, but I had a very similar experience where we were working with somebody and before I knew it, there was somebody else. I went out on vacation. I came back and there was 2 other people we were involved with. I came back again after some work travel and there was somebody else involved. And so I didn't know who to go to for what. And I found myself really struggling and sending emails to everybody. And then I was getting names wrong and confused. I mean, it's tough. And this is real. And so even if you have one of these, let's just say you have 2 of these boxes, right? Even sales to CS and CS to PM, that's a lot. And so imagine at different ends of the spectrum where you have multiple of these boxes. Guys, you have to understand that while we think we're doing a great job and we think we've made it crystal clear, we probably have not. And so one thing we won't talk about for this time, but I just will recommend, if you have designed an onboarding process, go through it yourself. Go through your own onboarding and see what it feels like and really live the experience that you're designing for your customers. I promise you will find ways to optimize and enhance that because this is true. It's very fuzzy. And while we think and believe and want to think that we're doing a great job, sometimes we're falling short. So what do we often get wrong? Well, I'll tell you, this is stuff that I hear from folks all the time. And listen, I've gotten this feedback as a leader myself because I myself am not perfect. I think that I'm doing my best. I'm trying to figure it out. this feedback makes its way to me as well. So I am not exempt from any of this. But first thing we hear is lack of continuity in messaging, right? Your sales team says one thing around what onboarding is going to look like and what the experience is, because of course they're designing this perfect picture of like, it's going to be amazing and they're going to guide you and they're going to do all this stuff and it's very consultative and white glove this and white glove that. And so then all of a sudden you get to your kickoff and there's a different type of messaging. And then you're working with somebody else and there's a different type of messaging. There isn't continuity in talking about the program the same way all the way through the customer journey. The second thing that we see folks get wrong is vague communication around roles and responsibilities. Now, if you've got an account team, which is wonderful, bless you. If you have multiple resources to support your customers, that is a good thing. But you have to be able to clearly articulate roles and responsibilities. Who is the customer supposed to be working with? How and when? What do they go to, right? This has got to be crystal clear for them. And this is something that we may set up front and we say it, okay, we did our kickoff call and we said, here, these are the roles and responsibilities, but we don't reiterate that messaging again and again and again. And listen, I don't know about you guys, but me, I need to hear things like 10 times, ask my husband, before I commit these things to memory. So you've got to make sure that you're not just introducing this once, but multiple times. The other thing that we run into is poor collaboration and cross-functional alignment. This, again, is something we see often. Organizations, we believe that we're sharing the right information and the insights, but if you're showing up to a customer call and you know that 3 other members of your team had been working with them and you're not going back to get the right information, the right context, the right notes, whether you're going to your CRM or your CSP or a system of record that you have to reference, or if you're not speaking with them directly, you don't have the right context and you might be asking questions that have already been answered, or you might be trying to advance your customer to move forward in something that they can't because maybe their integration isn't working or something broke or some other kind of roadblock is in the way preventing us from moving in the right direction. You have to have all that context, but poor collaboration and cross-functional alignment is going to break that. The other thing we see is siloed systems and data. This is notorious. I know that we're all trying to solve for this. We all want a single source of truth. But I will tell you, having worked with tons of organizations, very rarely does anyone ever say, yes, I have one place where I can go to get all of the information I need about my customers. It just doesn't happen. So I'm going to say, to the extent that you can, try to have a place where the information lives in one place to the extent that you can. I don't even care if it's a Word doc. I don't even care if it's Excel. Figure it out. And sometimes we have to get creative with how we're doing that. Because the minute you accept the fact that data is going to live in multiple places, you're not going to have the right access to it to use it to your advantage and to manage the experience. I promise you, things will fall through the cracks. Information will not get passed along, and then we break down, and that's where, again, we're going back to this poor collaboration and cross-functional alignment experience. Lastly, we have conflicting business goals and objectives. Now, your salesperson obviously has one objective. Your CS person has another objective. Onboarding implementation, they have another one, right? Training enablement, they have their own set of objectives. When you have competing objectives from all of these teams, they're trying to focus on their specific goals, right? If I'm the onboarding person, I was like, nope, I got to get this customer onboarded in 60 days. I got 10 people on the hopper. I got to get them through because my whole process and infrastructure breaks if I don't get that done. And your CSM might be worried about like, oh, well, we got to create a really good experience and we have to make sure that we're building the right relationships, that we're getting all these things configured properly. So everyone has different goals. Now, listen, businesses run that way, and I get that. I'm a business leader. I understand. But your customers don't care. And when you make your objectives their problem, things break. So these are the things that we're trying to solve for because we get this wrong all the time. And again, it's varying degrees. And I know that we do our best, but we've got to pay closer attention to these kind of point breaks because this is where things create friction for our customers. And that is what we're trying to accomplish today, right? Is eliminating points of friction to the extent that we can. All right, now hopefully I've highlighted a lot of what we do wrong and why this is important. And now let's get into some solving. Now, again, I'm going to have all the answers, but I'm going to give you some of the guidance that I have found instrumental to me and very helpful. I've gotten great feedback from our customers when we have introduced some of this. So hopefully some of this is coming from great experience that you guys can take into your own organizations. So the first piece of advice I'm going to offer you is that you need to create consistency. Now, when I talk about consistency, let's focus on the messaging, right? When I talked about this earlier in my example of going from sales to CS, from CS to implementation and PM, and so on and so on, there is a lack of consistency in what we're saying, right? We have to be consistent. And so, oftentimes we introduce the account team, but we don't do it early enough in the partnership, right? And so we're not consistent in some of these things. I would say, to the extent that you can and that you have control, have your sales team talk about the folks that they'll be working with as they move through the customer journey, right? I know that sales teams are always looking for new opportunities to get their prospects on a call. This is a great other way to add value, to have another point of contact, not a person necessarily, but an actual reason to connect with their customer, their prospect rather, and say, listen, we want to walk you through what it will look like when you actually do sign and what that experience will look like, who the account team is that you'll be working with. When you introduce that early, and then we introduce it again in email, and then we introduce it again in that partnership kickoff, and then we introduce it again as we move through that journey, that's when it starts to stick. That's the consistency that we're trying to design. The other thing that I would say is you need to get consistent with the same language. Now, I don't know about you, but I have heard my sales team describe things one way, and it's not inherently different than what I might be saying, but we're using different language. And so what that does is it confuses the message for our customers. And I know that that doesn't seem like a big deal, but think about the simple terms of configuration and customization. They feel similar, but they mean two very different things. And my reality is when I hear a certain word, I might be interpreting it one way. So we cannot assume that our customers understand that when we say things this way and we say things another way, that we mean the same thing. So you've got to get really tight on what is the language that we're using throughout the customer journey. What do we refer to things as? If we're calling something a project plan, call it a project plan. If you're in customer success, don't all of a sudden say, oh, well, your success plan. No, it's the project plan. These are nuanced things, but I promise you, the lack of consistency in things like this causes friction. The last thing I'd say here is you need to repeat messaging at key inflection points. This is really big. Like I said, repetition is big. It's really important. And so think about ways that you can continue to reiterate and restate things that you've said early on, not to the point where it sounds like you're just on loop. We don't want that to be the theme here. But in the moments where you have these inflection points, these really opportune times to talk about these things, I'm going to ask that you go back and repeat things. Add these things to decks that you're sharing and other assets. This is going to be really important. So let me share a little story here. One of the things that we did to try to solve for this is we created a visual. Now, this visual aid was one slide that was used in every single deck, in every single conversation that we presented to the customer. Continuity, right? We had this consistent message. So you can do this very easily just by creating a visual, right? And it's the same visual you use over and over again. You only have to create it once. You don't have to create it 20,000 times. What you do is you're going to ask your sales team, hey, when you talk to your prospect about what onboarding and implementation or enablement, whatever you guys are referring to it as, what this is going to look like, please use this slide. When you use this slide, here's how you should be describing it. Here are the words that you should be using, right? Again, it's that consistency throughout. So get your team to use this during your sales process. I promise you it will serve everyone well. Use the same visual in your kickoff. Your customers are going to start to become very familiar with the visual, right? Create something that is not really busy, not too heavy. It's something easy that they can follow, that flows, that uses the same language, and then use it in your kickoff. Upload it to your customer portal. If you have a place where you're sharing customer assets and material, upload it there as well. This is another point of reference. If you're using a platform where you can actually collaborate with your customers, right? And like you're uploading assets there. For example, at ClientSuccess, we use Baton, which is our onboarding software, to onboard our customers. So what we do is we make sure that these same assets are available in our customer portal. So when they need it, or they're going there to reference something, they're seeing that same visual. It reinforces the same consistent message. And then you refer back to it as needed. Okay. Whenever you have an opportunity to, whether you're doing your post onboarding review or anything like that, right? Like reusing it throughout the journey when it makes sense, where it makes sense, is going to help reinforce the message. So this is just a little hack. It doesn't take a lot of time and effort. If you're not doing this today, it's something you can easily go and create tomorrow. If you don't have Canva, I very much recommend the paid version of it. Is amazing, and you can create beautiful assets in minutes. So it doesn't even require a lot of time. You don't have to be a graphic designer or something like that, but you just want to create something you can use over and over again, that again will help you with that consistency. Okay, the next thing we want to focus on is creating continuity. Now, this is a little different than the consistency, but this is making sure that there's continuity across the people and information throughout the journey. Okay, so first thing we want to tackle here is ensuring that information flows across all systems. This is a pain point. I talked about it earlier. This continues to be an issue. But when you have information living in silos, right, you can't leverage that. You can't use it effectively. I talk to teams often, and what they tell me is like, yes, sales has their stuff in Salesforce. Our CS team has their stuff in ClientSuccess. We've got their onboarding team is using like Asana or something like that. Or they're using, another tool, or maybe they're even just using Google Docs. You've got all this information living in different places. And what happens is, because that information doesn't speak to each other, it's really difficult to make sure there's continuity. And so you have to start by making sure that you have a place that is your source of truth. And again, it could be one of those various systems that I listed out and said, you know what, for onboarding, guys, doesn't matter if this is your home base, that's okay. But for this project, everything we do has to live here. Now, of course, there are cool things out there like Zapier and others that could probably help connect these things. But if you don't have the ability to leverage a tech stack, if you don't have budget for additional tools and technology, I use a Google Doc, use a notepad. Like I'm saying, like, don't let things become prohibitive. Don't let your lack of creativity create a poor experience for your customers. I see this all the time. Like, there's excuses because, oh, I don't have product, or I don't have this or that. It's free for us to just create better experiences because we can use what we have at our disposal. The next thing I'm going to tell you to do is operate with clear roles and responsibilities. So here's a great example. I have built great relationships with my customers when I was a CSM, right? And they would always come back to me. Now, the CSM in me wants to be like, yep, I got it. I'll answer your question. And then I answer it. But guess what? That was actually somebody else's job, and I just did it. And so what I've done is I've enabled my customer to keep coming back to me, right? Same thing like if your customer goes and submits a support ticket and sends it to your CSM instead of creating a ticket in, Zendesk or Jira or whatever you're using, and your CSM answers it and they keep answering it, you've broken that model, right? There's no clear roles and responsibilities because your customers now believe that they can get what they need from you. And so you want to make sure that you're operating always with clear roles and responsibilities. Now, that doesn't mean that we say, oh, sorry, can't help you, go to Bob. No, it's creating and reinforcing good behavior, right? So what you might say is, here's this answer. In the future, your best route is to go to so-and-so because it's going to have a faster and more thorough response. Or I've looped this person in so that way you have them for next time. Or, your job is to make sure that everyone knows who to go to for what. So create that continuity by building it into your processes. Last is proactively manage messaging. Do not wait for your customers to raise their hand and figure things out. You have to be very clear with creating and being proactive with messaging that's going to be critical to their success throughout this entire experience. Remember, onboarding is really tough for folks. Even if you have a simple product, what seems simple to us is not simple to somebody who's never used it before, to a UI that they're not familiar with, right? Every platform or product I use takes a different approach to how they do things, and I have to relearn and re-educate and reacclimate myself to the experiences that they're designing for me. And that's the same challenge your customers are going to have, right? Not to say they can't figure it out, but your job is to help them figure it out easier and faster. So be proactive in the messaging and create that continuity throughout that life cycle. So here's some things we can do to just break the silos. And I know I hit on this, but first, figure out where you're going to keep the data. Guys, I cannot stress this enough. Find a home for it, especially for onboarding. Make sure that data is flowing in and out of these things. I've seen so many creative hacks of ways to get your CRMs to talk to other tools and systems, housing data in various places. If you're a pen and paper girl, or boy like me, I love a good notebook. I know that that's not serving anyone well when I take those notes because that lives exclusively with me. Nobody else has information, right? They don't have that context. That's not helping anyone. That's not helping create a good experience for my customers. You have to figure out a way to solve for this. And your solve could be a Google Doc. It could be Excel. It could be something very basic and easy. So don't over engineer it. Don't overthink it. Just make it happen. The second thing is you need to reference customer insights. Something that I see a lot of folks do is that they jump to a call with a customer and they won't have done the research, right? Because they're coming with their own objective. So again, when you have multiple people working with your customers in onboarding, right? Again, you've got these various teams. It's not unlikely that your CSM is going to want to engage your customer to keep continuity in parallel with the onboarding process that's continuing. But if I'm the CSM and I show up and I'm like, hey, Bob, and I'm all happy and I'm all like, yay, things are going great. And I didn't go and do my research before getting on that call, only to find out that the customer is in an escalated state because the integration isn't working the way they wanted, or, so and so hasn't been advancing, doing their homework in between these sessions. And so we're not really getting the work done that we need to get done. If I don't come with that context because I haven't done my homework before, that creates a lack of continuity in the experience for your customers, right? It shows that we're not on the same page. So before you engage with your customers, please make sure that you have all of the context and all the information necessary to have the appropriate discussion with them at the right time. Make sure that you're sharing things with your customers. Your customers should be part of this experience and you need to pull them in. And that doesn't mean that they need to see all of your little internal notes and all of your little chats, right? Like, oh, Bob stood me up on this call again for the 5th time this week. No, Bob doesn't need that context. He knows he was not there. But there is information that your customers can benefit from having. So as you think about what you're designing for them, share this proactively with them, right? Pull them into the process. People want change to happen with them, not to them. And I see this all the time. So how do you make sure that this experience is happening with your customers, not to your customers? The last thing I'm going to enforce here is that you make sure that the data is accurate and current. This is something that happens a lot as well, right? The data is stale. It's not correct. And so you need to make sure that not only is the data accurate and in the right systems, but that it's current. If you're looking here and there are no notes, there's no data that hasn't been updated in weeks, you cannot rely on that, especially in onboarding at a time where things are moving very fast for your customers. It's likely that you're meeting with them weekly. Maybe you're meeting with them daily. Who knows, right? So there's probably a high velocity in the cadence of engagement. So if you're noticing that the information that you have access to is outdated, do not use it. Do not rely on it. But it is your job to all make sure that everything you have access to is accurate and current. All right. I love this one. It's this idea of a one team approach. Listen, I've worked in organizations where we have had pod structures. If you're not familiar, where we basically have a team of people. So we might have a CSM, a project manager, a salesperson, an enabler, whatever, 4 different people working together. And we are one team that supports this customer. That is a beautiful way to work with your customers. But we know the reality is that many of us are not operating with this one team approach where we have a dedicated team to work with our customers. Oftentimes the reality is sometimes you're going to have Mary for onboarding, and sometimes you're going to have Beth for onboarding, and sometimes you're going to have Chrissy as your CSM, and sometimes you'll have Chris as your CSM. It doesn't matter, right? Like there's going to be kind of disjointed resources going through the process. That is probably more the norm than not. Pod structures are ideal. Great. We don't always get there. So when you don't, you still want your customers to feel this one team, right? They want to feel like this is their designated team, that you guys all work really well together and that you have a united front in working with them. Shared objectives, shared goals, shared understanding of their business. So the first thing you need to do is articulate this team approach. If you've got multiple people, you need to communicate this to your customers so they understand. These are my people. This is how I work with this team. Here's how they're going to help me. This has to be crystal clear, and you all need to operate that way. Now, this comes to the next part, which showing up together. Now, this doesn't always mean physically showing up together. I know that we all have different schedules and we can't always all be on the same calls, but think about this like conceptually, right? How do we show up together? This could be something as silly as, like even just CCing people on emails, right? If I'm the CSM and I'm corresponding with a customer, having my onboarding manager on CC, it appears like we're operating as this team. Now, you can even go ahead and create email aliases that are going to a shared inbox. Like you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a person's email address where you're flooding them in. There's other creative ways to do this, but there's this idea that you want to create, this experience you want to create, that there is one team, we show up together, we're all here to help our customer be successful. And the last one is aligned communication. Under no circumstances during this process or any process for your customers should there be conflicting messages. Now, I see this again quite often. One person says one thing and somebody else says the other thing. And then your customer is the one bringing you all together to say, I don't know if I'm supposed to go left or right because you're telling me left and this person is telling me right. And that becomes their reality. This is a really, really big problem for some organizations. Now, I hope that this is not as common as I feel like it is, but this is something you have to address. You have to have aligned communication. You cannot be messaging different things. It's the same thing with your product, guys. Even think about it in the ongoing support of your customers. If your product does something one way, but you've got somebody who believes it does it this way and somebody else that believes it does it this other way, your customers get confused. That confusion creates friction. These are the straws that break the camel's back, right? These are like the death by a thousand paper cuts. Every time you do something like this wrong, that's another slice, right? And that adds up. And so while these things seem small as independent items, what I'm trying to address is the overall experience and how we can enhance that. So let's talk about, how do you bring a united front to your customers? The first thing you're going to think about is, how do we map out important meetings, right? There are going to be some meetings where you all need to show up together. Okay? I'm sorry. It's just the reality. When you do a partnership kickoff meeting, your account team, you really should all be there. Now, I understand things come up. Maybe you're on PTO. You cannot be there. Understood. But let's not try to design for the exception. Let's try to design for the rule, which means 80% of the time, what can we get right? In this case, if there is a specific meeting or milestone that we should be together, let's map those out and get very clear on it. This is where planning comes into place, right? And making sure that you've got meetings on the calendar in advance to the extent that you can, or understanding that people will need to prioritize certain things over others. This is where prioritization comes into play as a CSM, right? It is a juggling act every day for sure. But you need to start by mapping out those meetings. So that way everyone understands, listen, if I can't be on everything, I know I have to be on the partnership kickoff call. I have to be at this other mid-milestone meeting, and then onboarding wrap up, right? Maybe those are 3 different points in times where you say, you know what, all together, all of us are going to be in those meetings. Great, map them out. Attend together when possible. One of the things that I love about my CSMs here at ClientSuccess is that they always see when they have a customer that is going through onboarding, and we do have a different person who manages onboarding, when they are available to attend an onboarding session, they do. They don't just take that time to go do something else or do email, or that's not just like another hour that happens to be free on their calendar. If they can, and if they have the time and bandwidth, they join those meetings. And what it does is it helps continue their relationship with the customer, right? Because they're present, they're engaged, they continue to learn and hear directly from their customer at these points. They're watching how configuration is happening, they're hearing what's important to the customer. And so again, you're just showing up as that united front. Now that is more of a physical showing up, but attend together when possible. And sometimes it's just like, hey, I'm just here as a fly on the wall. You don't even have to do anything. For all intents and purposes, I'm not looking at what you're doing on your screen. Go multitask. But there is something to be said about just being present and engaged in those moments. Reference work being done by other teams. This is something else that's really important because it shows that you know what everyone else is doing. I love it when my team, they'll go and say, they'll do a check-in with their customer. A check-in, I don't really like that term, but they'll follow up with their customer and say, hey, I see that onboarding is going well. I noticed that you've completed stage 2. By now you should have X, Y, and Z configured. This is great progress. Some things else that I heard during our kickoff call, I want to make sure that you're considering it, is like making sure you're doing A, B, and C in onboarding as well. I'll make sure that I'm sharing that feedback with your onboarding manager, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware. Right? You're referencing the work that they're doing. So even though you're not on all these calls, it shows that you know what's happening. You're offering and adding value, and you're creating that you're building yourself as a credible resource for your customer, which is going to help when you think about building trust long term. So reference, this is an easy way, right? Reference the work that's being done with your other team members. Again, it's that united front experience you're creating. And this is like such an easy one and something that like my team, it drives them crazy if people don't do. But if you're corresponding with your customer, it is so easy to just CC somebody. Just add them to the email, right? Give them that visibility. Maybe it's a follow-up from an email. Maybe it's, you're rescheduling something, something came up. It's so easy to CC somebody. Now, listen, I know not everybody wants that. Everyone's inbox is trash. Everyone's got a lot going on. Maybe it's noise. But don't just think about it from your experience. Think about what that signals to your customer. Now, my job here is to give you guys easy things to do. Well, these are easy things that you can do. These are things that change the experience and how you're showing up, which is really important. The next thing is you're going to design your roadmap. It's important to help your customers understand where they're going in the near and long term. It's so easy for us to just show up and be like, great, here's your next 60 days, your next 90 days, your next 6 months, whatever your onboarding implementation looks like. That's kind of short-sighted, right? We don't help design something for the future for our customers and help them understand, okay, here's where we're going now, and then here's where we're going to go later. There's something to be said about giving them the vision, not necessarily in a way that's like, uh-oh, great, now you've got 50,000 tasks. I'm not talking about like unveiling everything that they're going to do in perpetuity, right? But understanding that like, hey, for the next 30 days, we're going to be focusing on your integration. For the next 30 days after that, we're going to help you make sure that we're getting to this next milestone, right? And then after that, we're going to be getting over that hump and we're going to be getting to like, our onboarding wrap up where we focus on end user enablement. Once that is completed and we wrap up onboarding, we're then going to talk about what that looks like from an ongoing support standpoint. And it can be, you shared with us that your goal is A, B, and C. Great. Well, we're going to focus on how we do A, B, and C in the platform to help you see those results, right? You're designing that plan with them. And like I said earlier, people want to feel like change is happening with them, not to them. So design a plan with your customer for your customer. Come back to the plan. I cannot tell you how many times I see people present wonderful information for their customers in their kickoff call and then never reference that ever again. Maybe not never again, but like almost. So come back to the plan, right? If you achieve a milestone, bring that back so that way you can say, great, look, we did this thing. And now we're going to go do this next thing. And we still have this other stuff we're going to get to, right? So you have that long-term plan and vision, but come back to it. Let them know where they are on their roadmap. And then highlight the milestones and celebrate the wins. We don't do this often enough. I think so often all of us, we're so busy and we're moving so fast with usually not just one customer. And so it's always like, great, we checked that thing off the list and we're on to the next thing. We don't understand the real value and impact that celebrating those milestones can have for your customer. When they have a real win and something that they can materialize and share and socialize internally, we need to help them do that. So one of the things that we started doing here at ClientSuccess is that when our customers completed a stage in the journey, we basically highlighted for them the value of that stage, right? Because we probably created and completed some work together that was significant. And we'd say is great. Now, because we've done this, you have this visibility or you can do this thing that you could never do before, right? So we were changing the trajectory of how they think about their customer success program. We're highlighting those milestones and celebrating the wins. Find ways to articulate that value back to your customers and talk about it often with them. It's like exercise and dieting, right? Like the minute you lose 10 pounds, you're that much more motivated to keep the diet going, right? You've seen the results, you've seen the progress. Your customers need that. They need to feel that. They need to celebrate it. They need to acknowledge that. So help them, make that easy. So I love this is just kind of a pro tip is set your milestones. I see a lot of like onboarding journeys designed where it's like, great, we're going to go from A to Z. Cool. At what point do I feel like I've accomplished something, right? I know that I'm going to go through months and months of meetings and I've got all this work that I need to do, which is great, I guess. But like, what are the things that I can stop and acknowledge and see progress against? So I'm going to challenge you all, if you do not have this very clearly defined, is set clear milestones. And your milestones, I'm not talking about like, great, you completed this thing. Something meaningful. You need to make sure that that is a measurable win. right? So once you've set those, how is your customer measuring the value of that thing that they have completed? You have to be able to do that. You need to celebrate and socialize this. I don't care if it is an email. I don't care if it is a Loom video. Get creative. I've actually seen people do that. I actually got one myself from a CSM of a platform that I was using. I completed something and the CSM, and I'm working with an onboarding manager, the CSM sent me a Loom video, like basically like with confetti. It was the cutest thing. And they were like, yay, you did this thing and you completed and like celebrated with me over a Loom video. And it was like a 1 minute long Loom video. It probably took them no time. They probably make a billion of them. But I was excited. I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. Yeah, I did that thing. And like I was celebrating myself watching a 1 minute long video. There are so many creative ways that we can go and make our customers feel excited about the work that we're doing. And it doesn't have to be as cheeky as that, but like you get what I'm saying, right? Lean into the personalities and the personas of the people that you're working with. Maybe that doesn't resonate with everybody. That resonated with me, but find something that'll work well for the people that you're working with at your customers. At the very least, if nothing else, make sure that your executive stakeholders understand the impact you're having. It's as simple as that. It could be a milestone like update that you're providing, and you talk about it in the partnership kickoff and say, great, Mr. Executive, thanks so much for joining us, Mrs. Executive. Every milestone we hit, you're going to receive an email from us that's going to articulate what we did, how we got there, and the impact that it's having to your business now that we've achieved that goal. Great. And then communicate that there and then do it and then send the email. Make sure that people understand that the work that they're putting in has value coming out. And then continue to paint the picture for them near and long term, right? People need to understand, like, great, if I did this thing and this was my win and I'm really excited, what's next? What's the next win? It's like that dopamine hit, right? It's like why social media works for so many people, right? They love the likes. Get people excited, get them bought in. And so if you can help them understand what that next milestone is and what they're continuing to build to, you're going to continue the momentum that you have in the relationship. These are all ways that you can, again, reduce friction, continue to articulate value, and get people excited about the work that you're doing. All right, so before we move to Q&A, because I am watching the clock here, I want to just kind of give you guys a quick wrap up. I know that we covered 4 different themes here with a bunch of little tips and tricks of things that you can do. Hopefully these are all low calorie, low effort. I didn't ask you guys to go buy $1 billion software, and I didn't ask you to go put in 8 months of worth of design work to try to figure things out. I gave you guys things that you can all go plug into your design models tomorrow. So first thing I want to leave you with is create clear roles and responsibilities for every member of your team and keep redirecting. Please, under no circumstances should you take on the work of somebody else because you think it's easier. What you're doing is you're creating bad behaviors. Use the account team that you have designed. Your resources are actually being designed very intentionally by your leadership teams, by your organization. And if you break that model consistently, right, it doesn't scale. You cannot be the person who's carrying the burden for every other person in your group, right? You might be the primary point of contact, but you're not the primary point of action. So keep redirecting as you need. Make your comms easy and manageable, right? Like make sure that communications with your customers are easy, they're digestible. Don't let your customers get stuck in a loop, right? Don't keep them in this cycle of like things that they're working through. Make sure that you're communicating early, often, that it's digestible, it's very clear and intentional. Okay? Make sure that every time you're communicating with your customers, there is clear intent of why. Please do not reach out to me for the sake of reaching out to me. Number 3, be united as a team in how you present and share information at all stages. Show up as one team. Remember, even if you're not one team, make your customers feel as if you are one team, that you are their team. And you can do that by showing up that way, presenting information that way as a unified front, making sure that at every stage, at every point and turn in this journey with them, they know what's happening with whom, when, and how. Lastly, focus on impact. This is true for us all, but it's never been more important than now that we make sure that onboarding and implementation, your product configuration, focuses on impact. It is so easy to want to get people to go through this checklist of things to feel like, yep, I did the thing, they're done, we're great, everyone's happy. Remember, even though we cannot behave as if all of our customers are unique, the reality is they are. They're not all starting from the same place of knowledge. They don't all have the same resources. They don't all have the same use cases, pain points, like team members, all of these things are variables for your customer. And so even though you may have designed an ICP that put them in a bucket that says, well, you kind of should all behave the same, that's not their reality. So it should be flexible. It should feel very bespoke to them. So when you're designing things, don't make it so rigid. Don't make it such that you can't operate outside that box, because you need to be able to design something that for them, from their perspective, it feels like you designed this for them, exclusively for them. And that's what flexibility does create. So as long as your teams have the ability to be flexible and get things done the right way for your customers, they're going to have a really good experience. So that said, that leads us to Q&A, which I have 7 minutes to get to as many questions as possible. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Hopefully I give you guys some things to think about. I am going to go over here and take a quick sip of water, if that is okay. I'm assuming that you're all giving me your blessing to have some water. I appreciate the permission. Okay. Yes, thank you, Melissa. All right, very good. So let's see if we can get to some of these questions. So I'm going to start here. Amy, you had a question. So do you find that there's a different onboarding experience journey for on-prem versus SaaS solutions? Oh gosh, yes. So at some point in my career, I did work with hardware and software. And so not just hardware exclusively and not just software exclusively. My product had a hardware component and a software component. So yes, everything you should be designing should be different depending on what it is that you're looking for to create for your customers. If it is an on-prem solution, I mean, it is likely that you're going to be maybe even on site with your customers if there's something that has to be deployed, if there's actual hardware there, or if it's something that's being deployed on their systems. So yes, you're not going to design a one-size-fits-all. And what works for me and my customers in a fully SaaS environment is not going to be the same solution that works when you have different levels of complexity. And this is something I want to continue to hit home. There is no one size fits all customer success model. There is no one size fits all customer onboarding model. I have done this 5 times at 5 different companies, ClientSuccess being my 5th. And I have never, ever designed the same journey, experience, team, infrastructure, model, data, metrics. It looked different every single time I did it. So I want to encourage you guys to take what you're learning from folks like myself or anything else that you're learning, reading, hearing, seeing, and think about how you can apply that for your use cases. But this is not Legos. You're not just plugging this in, right? So please take these learnings, take your customers into consideration. If you design for your customers first and foremost, you'll likely get it right. So yes, long answer to a question that should have been a shorter one, but yes, there will be a different experience for those. Somebody asked about Baton. Is it also client facing? So yes, thank you for the question. Yes, Baton does have a client facing section where you can actually go and make a customer portal. So whatever it is, the plan that you're guiding your customers through for onboarding and implementation, yes, they will have their version where they can kind of see where they're at, what they need to do, how they need to do it. Lots of customization there. If you'd like to learn more about Baton, please reach out to our sales team. They'd be happy to share more about that. Another question that came up was, how has your experience, what has been your experience, best practice to ensure that the economic buyers also stay engaged during implementation process? They're not going to. That's just the reality. Here's a good for instance, right? I'm the CCO at ClientSuccess. If I procure software, I will be part of the buying process. I will even show up for the kickoff call. I am not going to be onboarding. Okay, my team is going to onboard that. I'm going to delegate that to somebody else. What I will do, though, is participate in any conversation that helps me understand how things are progressing, understand value, if there is roadblocks. So for example, if my team is not doing what they need to do to get things moving forward, I'm happy to participate in that. What I have seen worked really well to keep my attention and my engagement is the socialization of value and impact. So like I said, when that CSM where I use the example of they sent me a Loom video celebrating my success, I was engaged. You don't have to think about having somebody show up in a meeting to consider that engagement, right? If somebody sends me something and I consume it, whether it's, like I said, a video, an article, an email, and I acknowledge it, and I either take an action, don't take an action, depending on what the CTA is for me, then I have been engaged. So I don't want us to confuse engagement with being present on a call. Okay. There are tons of ways for you to keep executive stakeholders engaged, but you have to make sure that you understand what is going to be seen as value for them. If you're going through complex and technical product configuration, if your executive stakeholder is not the one using the product or designing and configuring that, they're likely not to be involved. They're likely going to delegate it to somebody else. So let's not set ourselves up with that false hope that we've got to keep them engaged. There are other ways for you to keep them engaged. Find out how they want to work with you. One of the questions that my team asks our customers when we have an executive stakeholder, which we do require for the kickoff call, that they be present, we ask, first we ask them, what role do you intend to play in the onboarding? We start with onboarding, but then there's the ongoing journey. In onboarding, what role do you intend to play? And they're going to tell us, like, you know what? Nope, I'm delegating this to my team. I won't be involved. Okay, very good. How would you like us to keep you informed of? And then we kind of walk through the things that we think are important for them to know or to acknowledge as we go through. And we ask them, how do you want us to keep you up to date, right? Or involved. Some of my people say asynchronous communication is great. Make a video, send it my way. I'll send it back. Do you have a Slack channel that you can invite me to? Send me an email, send me a report, print me out a PDF. Ask them and lean into it that way, right? So often we want to make assumptions that we know best for our customers and we just don't. So allow them to tell you what they want and how they want it, and then leverage that. Then you're going to create the experiences that they want, and then they're more likely to engage. But if you're asking me to join a 60-minute meeting, I just don't have the time for that. And if the context is not applicable to me, I'm really not going to be there. So just think about that also. I know that we only have 1 minute left. Yikes. Okay. Let's see if I can get to one more. There are great questions in here. Okay. What metrics do you follow during onboarding to report to your management? This is a great question, and it's actually going to be covered in, I think, the fourth series of this webinar series, the fourth session. So there is a session called Beyond the Days, because I want to get away from just measuring days in onboarding as a metric for onboarding. So I'm going to end there and say, join that webinar, and we're going to cover all of the metrics that you should be paying attention to in onboarding. So that said, I know that we are at time and I don't want to keep you guys a minute over. I have already taken up too much of your time today. I want to just thank you all for carving out some time in your busy schedules to be here with me. Hopefully you found some value in this session and you feel it was a good use of your time. That is always, always, always my primary goal, is that you found something here that was valuable, that was worth giving me 60 minutes. If you had to drop off, don't worry. It's recorded. It will be shared. Please tell your friends. We'd love to have more people here partying with us in the chat next week. So we've got next week and then 3 more sessions to go. So hopefully I will see you guys next Tuesday, same time, same place. Until then, thank you guys so much and have a great rest of your week.